Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Pesachim. We are up to Perek Zayin, Mishnah Yud Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbai, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. The commentaries explain the people who registered for a Pesach offering may divide themselves into more than one group to eat it. However, one person may not eat the Pesach with more than one group. And the Rav explains from the Gemara on page 86a, Masechet Pesachim, two verses discuss where the Pesach offering is to be eaten. One verse states in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, Pasuk 7, the houses in which they will eat it, which implies that a Pesach may be eaten in more than one house. This refers to the offering itself, namely that a single Pesach offering may be eaten by more than one group in more than one place, even in different houses. Another verse over there in chapter 12, Pasuk 46 states, in one house shall it be eaten, which implies that it must be eaten in one house. Now this verse refers to the people eating the Pesach and teaches that one person may not eat the Pesach in more than one house or even in more than one place in the same house. Now the Mishnah states some laws that relate to this. If two groups are eating a single Pesach in one house, these people, meaning one group, may turn their faces in one direction and eat. And these people, meaning the other group, may turn their faces in another direction and eat. Now, although this makes it clear that they are two separate groups, it's not concerning. It is of no concern, because the Pesach may be eaten in more than one group. And for the same reason, the kettle of water that is used to dilute the wine may be placed even in the middle between the two groups, even though it separates them. Now the Miri explains wine in those times was too strong to drink on its own and was usually mixed with warm water. Therefore, at the Pesach Seder, when people were drinking wine, they kept a large kettle of warm water in the room. And again, the Mishnah says that's not an issue, even though you can place it between the two groups, even though it separates them. However, when the waiter who is sitting and eating with one of the groups stands to pour wine for the people in the other group, he must close his mouth and turn his face toward his own group until he reaches his own group, and then he may eat, meaning since a single person may not eat the Pesach with more than one group, the waiter who eats with one of the groups but serves both of them must be careful to keep his mouth closed and to face his own group when he is serving the group that he is not eating with, so that he is not suspected of eating with that group as well. And the Mishnah concludes with a related law, a bride who is embarrassed to eat in front of people may turn her face away from her group and eat. Now, since a bride is the center of attention and people are looking at her, she may be embarrassed to eat while facing them, so she could turn her face away from the group and eat, even though by doing this, it's as though she's eating apart from the group with which she is sitting. Now, this is also permitted because a Pesach may be eaten by more than one group, as we have stated, as the Rav explains. And that is the end of Mishnah Yud Gimel. We continue now with Perek Chet Mishnah Aleph. As we have learned earlier in chapter 5, Mishnah 3, and chapter 6, Mishnah 6, one must be registered on a Pesach offering before it is slaughtered to fulfill his obligation and eat from it. Now, the first four Mishnayot of this chapter discuss the laws of this registration. A person cannot be registered on more than one Pesach offering. The following Mishnah discusses various cases in which two people each registered a third person on their Pesach offering. The Mishnah will teach which, if any, of the registration is valid. Now, the first case is where a woman's father and husband both register her on their offerings, and she did not state in advance which one she wanted to join. Now, a person cannot be registered on a Pesach offering without his explicit consent, unless we have a good reason to assume that he agrees to the registration, as the Mishnah will explain. The Mishnah begins, Haisha bizman shi bebet bala, when a woman is in her husband's house, meaning she is married, shachat aleh bala, and her husband registered and slaughtered his Pesach offering on her behalf, v'shachat aleh avia, and her father also registered her and slaughtered his offering on her behalf, tochal mishel bala, she eats from her husband's offering, because we may assume that a married woman prefers to be registered on her husband's offering over her father's. Halcha regel rishon lasod bevet avia. If, however, she went to spend the first festival after she got married in her father's house, meaning it was common practice for a newly married couple to spend the first festival after their marriage in the home of their wife's father, and the Mishnah refers to a case in which the first festival after the woman got married was Pesach, and therefore she went to spend Pesach with her father, shechat alea avia v'shechat alea bala, and her father and her husband both registered and slaughtered their Pesach offerings on her behalf. Tochal b'makom shirotza, she may eat in whichever place, meaning from whichever offering she said that she wanted to be registered on before it was slaughtered. However, if she does not say anything at that time, she may not eat from either offering, the commentators explain, because in this case it cannot be assumed which offering she preferred. Since she's spending the first festival with her father, as most married couples do, it's possible that she prefers to eat from her father's offering. Therefore, neither registration is valid, since they both lack her consent. Now, the next case of the Mishnah involves guardians of an orphan. These are people appointed by the father before he died, or the court, to manage the affairs of the orphan. Yatom sheshachatu alav apatropsin. In the case of an orphan who has two guardians, and each of the guardians registered the orphan on his Pesach and slaughtered it on his behalf, yochal b'makom shurotzeh, the orphan may eat in whichever place, meaning from whichever offering he wants, even if he did not say anything before the Pesach was slaughtered, because the Torah authorizes a guardian to register orphans under his care, even without their consent. We learn this from the pasuk in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, pasuk 3, and they should take for themselves, each man, a lamb for his household for the Pesach offering. Now this implies that the head of the household, meaning the father, or a guardian who is appointed to take the place of the father, has the right to register the members of his household even without their consent. And the Mishnah refers here to an orphan who is a minor, but a guardian cannot register an adult orphan without his consent, right? The Gemara on page 88a discusses that our Mishnah is referring to an orphan who's a minor, because a guardian cannot register an adult orphan without his consent, and the same for a father registering his child. Now, therefore, either of the guardians' registrations can be valid for the orphan, depending on which one the orphan chooses. However, you cannot choose to be registered on both offerings, since one person cannot be registered on two Pesach offerings. Now, the Mishnah continues, the owner of a Canaanite slave has the right to decide which Pesach offering the slave will be registered on, even against the slave's will. A Canaanite slave is a non-Jewish slave who undergoes a partial conversion and is obligated in the same mitzvot as women. Such a slave is considered a member of the master's household, whom the master can register without consent, like we learned earlier, based off the pasuk in Sefer Shemot and the Gemara on page 88a. Now, the Mishnah discusses the case of a slave jointly owned by two partners who was registered by his owners on their offerings. Eved shel shnei shutafin, in the case of a Canaanite slave who was owned by two partners, and each of the partners registered the slave on his Pesach offering. Lo yochal mishel shnehen, the slave may not eat from the offering of either of them, because neither registration is valid. Since each owner has rights to only half of the slave, each partner cannot register the half he does not own without the consent of the other partner. Therefore, the Rav says the only way this slave can be registered on a Pesach offering is if both owners agree to the slave being registered with one of the owners. The Mishnah continues now with another law regarding a Canaanite slave who has been registered on the Pesach offering of his owner. Misha chetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin, a person who is half Canaanite slave and half free. For example, a slave who was owned by two people and one of them freed him, whose owner registered him on a Pesach offering. Lo yochal mishel rabo, he may not eat from his owner's offering, because we assume the owner intended to register only half, the half that is his slave, not the half that is free, as Rashi explains in the Tvelt Yisrael. Now, even if the slave expresses consent, the registration is not valid, since the owner did not intend to register him. Therefore, the slave is not fully registered on the offering, and therefore may not eat from it. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.